Hi, my name's Jen Bruce. I'm a functional nutritionist and lifestyle practitioner, as well as a psychedelic integration coach. And my area of specialty is holistic mental health and addiction recovery. In this video, I wanted to talk to you about exploring the roots of depression and the fact that there is no scientific evidence to prove the serotonin theory, which is the theory that states that the cause of depression is serotonin deficiency. And while serotonin deficiency definitely can play a role in depression, even if serotonin deficiency is one cause of depression, there's reasons underneath that our serotonin would be low. So my hope for you in this video is to share some information, especially to those of you who may be labeled as treatment resistant because the Western psychiatric model, the antidepressant medications, maybe they haven't worked for you. And the truth is that there's many causes of depression. And if the medication hasn't worked for you, if regular talk therapy hasn't worked for you, it's not that you are treatment resistant. It's not that you are broken. It's not that you're hopeless. It's that they're not addressing the root cause of your depression. When we reach this point, it's really important to start becoming the CEO of our own health, and education is the first step. In addition to serotonin deficiency being a contributing factor to depression in some cases, there's also many other reasons that we could be experiencing depression. One of the most likely scenarios in the Western culture, especially in the United States, is that one of the root causes, and again, today when I talk about all of the different root causes of depression, it's usually not just one thing. It's usually a variety, a combination of some of the things I'm going to be sharing with you here. And they're all interrelated. And you can always go over to Humans Can Heal, my website, where I teach more into these things, or in my one-on-one sessions. But for the purpose of this video, we'll just touch on the different possible root causes of depression, and then know that these come in a constellation most of the time. So if we're in the Western culture, if we're in the United States specifically, one of the reasons that people can have depression is in direct relationship to their diet. Now, why is that? Well, our body requires nutrients that over the history of human beings until the last 60 years, our whole foods diet provided us with the nutrients that we needed. And nowadays, since we've commercialized our food production, and most of us are eating processed, pre-made foods, either from restaurants, fast food joints, or from grocery stores, is that these foods have been made to have shelf stability and are very much depleted in the nutrients that our body requires to stay healthy. So why does this matter with looking at depression? Well, because depression is something that happens. The organ associated with our mental health is our brain. And the larger system in the body that's associated with our brain is our nervous system. And so our nervous system and our brain require specific nutrients from our diet in order to produce chemicals like serotonin and dopamine that help us stay elevated out of states of depression, help us not stay stuck in depression, and help us keep our brain working optimally so that we can have our best mental health and mood stability. So when we're looking at our diet, there's nutrients like tryptophan, like tyrosine. Tryptophan turns into 5-HTP. 5-HTP turns into serotonin. Tyrosine turns into dopamine. Dopamine is responsible for giving us motivation. Dopamine is responsible for giving us zest for life and a sense of reward for the daily little things that happen in one's life that generally bring somebody with balanced mental health joy. So the diet is a huge problem in the West. If you have depression, it's very likely that you are also struggling with nutrient deficiencies. When we're in depression, we tend to use food for comfort, and those foods are generally not good for us. The other part of the diet in the Western culture that links us to depression is the fact that these foods are highly inflammatory, and inflammation is where the inside of our body becomes inflamed or swollen. It's an immune response. And so when we're eating foods that are processed, that are high in carbohydrates, that are high in unhealthy fats, these kinds of foods packaged foods, processed foods, fast foods, it literally causes us to become inflamed on the inside, and our brain is not protected from that. Our brain can become inflamed as well. And so if we are looking through the lens of serotonin deficiency, dopamine deficiency, and other neurotransmitter deficiencies that certainly do play a role in our mood and our mental health, if we think about how small these little neurotransmitters are, think about how small the pathways are for them to travel through in the brain. So if we're inflamed, those pathways become smaller. And so what happens is that we may have enough serotonin, we may have enough dopamine and other neurotransmitters that help stabilize our mood, but their ability to travel and move to where they need to go is diminished and slowed down due to the fact that the little pathways they travel in are literally swollen and there isn't enough space for them to efficiently move through. So nutrient deficiency and inflammation are two factors that can exacerbate or lead to depression. And the third reason that food is important and our diet is important when we're looking at depression is because our gut health is intricately connected to our brain health. We actually have a separate nervous system in our gut called the enteric nervous system, which is where our central nervous system comes from while we're in utero. And if we're not eating a whole foods healthy diet, if we're eating a standard American diet, lots of processed foods, lots of sugar, it's very likely that our gut is not healthy. Oftentimes, if we have depression, we're also going to have digestive problems. Another way you can cross-check this is if you look on the side effects of most antidepressants that work especially along the serotonin pathway, is that one of the main side effects are going to be GI disruptions, whether it's constipation or diarrhea or something like that, because 95% of our serotonin is produced in a healthy gut, specifically in relationship to our microbiome, which is between 5 and 7 pounds of bacteria and microbes, which when in balance and healthy, really has a lot to do with the regulation of many chemicals that affect our mental health, such as serotonin and dopamine. So if we're on an unhealthy diet, we have an unhealthy gut, we will not be able to have good mental health because we need a healthy gut to have a healthy brain. So another root cause to do with food, to do with diet, to do with lifestyle is the connection between our gut health and our mental health. So another root cause of depression can be an unhealthy gut. These can be fixed with food. Other reasons that we could be experiencing depression, where traditional methods of treating depression aren't working or aren't working all the way, is that our hormones have a lot to do with our mood. Especially women are very likely to be struggling with a thyroid disorder that's undiagnosed, that are struggling with depression. And so when our thyroid is low, our thyroid is really responsible in many ways for our mental health and our energy levels. And so if our thyroid is low, one of the symptoms of a low thyroid can be depression. And oftentimes we can go to our regular Western allopathic doctor, like our primary care physician, and even get tested for a low thyroid. But the problem is that oftentimes those tests will come back as false negatives because they're only testing for one part of the thyroid. They're testing for thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, but there's in fact other things that you need to test for to accurately rule in or rule out a thyroid condition. And so we also want to look for T3, T4, and especially for women, another thing that's not being tested for regularly in a doctor's office is thyroid antibodies, because there's an autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's, and that can cause a low thyroid, and that won't come up on a TSH test every time. And so we must get a full thyroid panel to rule in or out if that might be a root cause of our depression. And if we do have depression as a result of our thyroid, guess what? We get our thyroid taken care of, we learn how to manage that condition, and our depression can start to lift. And that has nothing to do with serotonin deficiency. Another cause of depression that can go overlooked and undiagnosed for an entire lifetime if we don't look at it is chronic illness. Carrying things like autoimmunity, other than Hashimoto's or including Hashimoto's, that's undiagnosed can cause depression. Mold illness, if we've had exposure to mold, can cause depression, and that's very much in the physical body. So has our doctor screened us for mold toxicity if there's a suspicion that that may be something we've been exposed to in the past? And if that's the case, we can take care of the mold issue, which can become a neurotoxin for those of us that are sensitive, and the depression can get better. Another reason that people are struggling with depression perhaps is because they're not getting proper sleep. If we're not getting proper sleep over a long period of time, it can disrupt our entire nervous system. It can disrupt our hormones. It can really lead to mood problems. And if we're exhausted, depression feels like exhaustion. Many of us are not sleeping at the right time of night. It's very important that we sleep at night and get up in the morning. Our circadian rhythm is an incredibly important part of our mental health and overcoming things like depression. You know, many of us are spending way too much time inside, watching screens at night. These kinds of things can have a massive impact on our mental health. So, and even if we are sleeping at night, sometimes we're not getting the quality of sleep that we need. So have we checked in about the quality of sleep? You know, maybe our depression is because of sleep deprivation chronically over a long period of time. Another reason that can cause us to have depression is insulin resistance. Whether it's prediabetes or diabetes, one symptom of that is depression. And what I've seen in my private practice here over the last 10 years, working holistically with my clients on their mental health, is that most folks that have been diagnosed with prediabetes or diabetes are not told that depression is one of the symptoms of that illness. And instead, they get put on a separate medication and go to a psychiatrist for their depression. When we have diabetes or prediabetes, when we have insulin resistance, insulin is what carries glucose from our blood into the cell so that we can use the glucose, the blood sugar, for energy. So if we're diabetic or pre-diabetic, we're literally not able to get the glucose, the energy packets out of our bloodstream to nourish our cells, to then give the mitochondria the energy it needs to produce energy. And so again, exhaustion and depression. And there's much more to that with diabetes, but just know that insulin resistance, one of the symptoms is depression. So it's not like I have diabetes and I also have depression. It's like this is one of the symptoms of my diabetes. And you can reverse diabetes with diet and lifestyle. It does not have to be a lifelong illness. It's a lifestyle disease. It's not a genetic disease. And if it's running in your family, it's because of the eating habits that have been taught through the generations. If you change the eating habits, the exercise habits, the self-care habits, we can reverse this diabetic condition and maybe also help alleviate the depression that can come with it. Another reason that we may have depression is that we have unhealed trauma. Trauma is not an event in our life, it's how we experienced an event. And so, especially if we go back to our childhood, something traumatic can be something seemingly very insignificant, but at the time, whatever we've experienced, it was more than our nervous system could process, digest, and move forward from. We have an incomplete stress response and a dysregulated nervous system. And so when we've been in chronic stress response, when we carry unhealed trauma, or if we're also living in chronically stressful conditions now, maybe it's even a unrewarding, ever-demanding corporate job that we just can't handle. Maybe we have that in conjunction with children to take care of at home, and it's just more than our nervous system can handle. This is also chronic toxic stress. We can go into what's called freeze response. Freeze response is us completely shutting down to conserve our energy so that we can survive. So if we're in freeze response, it's very much going to look and feel like depression. And it is depression, but it's not a serotonin deficiency. It's a matter of healing our trauma, completing our stress response, and building balance, vitality, and resilience in our nervous system, which is what the brain is part of. And then we can lift ourselves out of depression by doing the healing work on trauma, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, but also very much physically. And this is somatic work. So that is a big cause of depression. Are we out of community? So we are genetically wired. Another reason for depression is that we are lonely. And in American society today, loneliness is at an all-time high. They recently did a study and they asked people who they had to call, how many people they had to call in their life if they needed help, if there was an emergency. And the consensus was most people said 0. And so we're genetically wired to be in community, to be tribal. We were always tribal for the eons that preceded our modern day culture, we lived in tribes or villages or communities because we actually need each other to survive. And if we were separated from our tribe, it was very much reasonable to feel anxious and depressed because our lives were literally at stake to be separated from our tribe. And so it hasn't been very long. It's only been a couple generations where people are really living on their own by themselves in today's Western culture. And so we haven't genetically adapted out of needing to be around people. So there's a very real reason that we're going to feel depressed. It's our survival mechanisms turning on. If we're not in community, if we don't have people in our lives that are truly supportive of us, family, friends, these kinds of things. And so depression can result from feeling isolated and being alone and separated. And so in this case, that's not going to be something that a pill that increases your serotonin is going to take care of. The only thing that's going to take care of that kind of depression is to go get into community. And you can learn ways to do that. We have to become very creative and artistic in creating tribe and community in today's singular society and culture. So there's that. Another reason that we could be feeling depressed and we have depression and maybe we're not responding to traditional treatments is that we are experiencing grief. Have I had loss in my life, even if it was a long time ago? Because another thing that we're missing in today's Western culture is this knowing how to process grief. And traditionally, we would have processed grief within the support of a community. So now here we are, very much alone, most of us, and then we have not been taught the skills to process our grief. So it doesn't matter when something's happened. And then there's also not a time frame of how long the grieving period is going to take. In the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual that diagnoses mental health conditions, says that if more than 30 days has gone by and the person's not feeling better, then it's a medical condition like depression. Well, who's to say that 30 days, the amount of time that everybody needs maximum to process grief? If you've really had some loss in your life, 30 days is not going to be enough. And also, what am I doing with those 30 days? Do I have the skill set to process my grief? Because if I don't, it doesn't matter how many days go by, I'm just holding my grief in and I'm not processing it. So 30 years could go by and I'm still carrying that grief. So grief mimics depression. And there's no pill to process our grief. It's a process that we have to do with at least another human being. Same thing goes with anger. And this is especially true for women because in civilized, colonized life and society, women have been taught that having anger is bad and that we repress our anger. And so when we repress our anger, that takes an incredible amount of energy to hold that anger inside of us. And it's going to take our vitality away, and we're going to end up feeling depressed because we're turning our anger inwards. Anger is not a bad thing. Anger is there to keep us safe. It's there to help fuel change in our life, to put boundaries up. So it's not that we want to be rid of anger, it's that we need to learn how to use it properly and how to process it properly and how to get it out of our system quickly in a healthy way. So unprocessed anger, unprocessed grief, really any unprocessed emotions at all can turn into depression because that takes an incredible capacity to keep these things in. And then also eventually will explode. So that can also look like a mental health disorder, And a side note, like with depression, people who are diagnosed with the mild or end of bipolar disorder, that can mimic being in the cycle of fight, flight, and freeze, which is trauma stress response. So if I'm going between being agitated and angry and escalated to being shut down and depressed, I may have a brain disorder called bipolar, or I may be cycling through fight, flight, freeze in stress and trauma response that hasn't been resolved. And the good news in that situation is that if we get into our nervous system and look at it through a trauma-informed lens, we can actually heal from it. Circling back, there's other root causes of depression, but those are some really good ones to consider. If you're interested in getting any of those things checked out, one thing that you can do is add to your health team, in addition to your psychiatrist, in addition to anything in the Western model is to get a holistic health practitioner, whether it's a functional doctor, a naturopathic doctor, a functional practitioner, nutrition and lifestyle medicine like myself, somebody that's going to understand the root cause approach, that they can get you the lab tests that you need, they can take a look at your diet and your lifestyle and see where you can improve. Even if it is serotonin deficiency, there's still so much you can do to resolve the reason that you are serotonin deficient. Some of us have genetics in that direction. But this all being said on this video, I'd like to circle back because the first thing I mentioned, the nutrition and the kind of lifestyle, the healthier lifestyle, all the other things going on, whether it's hormone imbalance, autoimmunity, thyroid problem, chronic illness, emotional stuff like anger and grief, you're still going to find great benefit by adding the foundational tool of nutrition and lifestyle medicine, because we need energy to heal. We need energy to work through our emotions. We need energy to change. And so one of the foundational things we can put in place for depression and healing from depression and overcoming depression and not just managing it, or not just feeling hopeless because we've been told we're treatment resistant because 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 different pills didn't work for us, we can fuel the change. So I would invite you, if you found this video helpful or informative at all, please check out some other videos and come on over to Humans Can Heal. It's my website, it's my platform where I teach all of the holistic tools that we need to heal our mental health, fuel ourselves on the journey from recovering from trauma and even addiction. I'm sending you so much love, and I'll see you again soon.